Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.
I recently watched the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. Although the show is light on propaganda, like all film, it does contain some propaganda. In this case, it is the basic Soviets bad, America good type of propaganda you see in most Cold War fiction. Nothing remarkable in of itself, but there are some interesting observations we can make from it. The typical Cold War propaganda is that the Soviet Union was bad because the state had near total control over the truth, and that America doesn't do that, so it is good. This is mostly correct, except that it's not really true that the United States is devoid of this type of control. Both the Soviet Union and the United States have one. The Soviet Union was just more honest about it. In the Soviet Union, the state had formal power over the truth. This power was concentrated upwards into specific individuals. Whether one supported the system or not, it was no secret that power was centralized in the Communist Party. In the United States, the state itself does not have formal power over the truth. In fact, no entity has formal power over the truth, but this power is exercised nonetheless by what we have come to know as the Cathedral. The goals of the Cathedral and the Soviet Union's Communist Party are identical in terms of the exercise of power. While it's easy to miss this comparison due to the way anti-Soviet pro-American propaganda is distributed in films, there is little fundamental difference between the two. The Soviets, both in real life and fiction, are more open than the Cathedral about what they are doing. The state was an object of reverence in the Soviet Union, and speaking out against it in any way was a crime of blasphemy. Soviet citizens were required to treat the state as a religious source of truth, just as people treat the cathedral as a religious institution that propagates truth, as we have learned. But the cathedral is not open about this, partially because it is decentralized, the opposite of how the Communist Party was organized, and most of its members don't really understand the system of control that they unwittingly participate in. Even those who do exercise the power of the cathedral intentionally probably don't realize the full strategic power at their disposal. It's also strategically advantageous for the cathedral to camouflage its existence. By the last decade of the Soviet Union's existence, after a long process of disillusionment, citizens could point to specific problems and falsehoods created by the state, and point at the state and the very people responsible for them. In the United States, citizens can point at government officials, but this is rather fruitless considering that politicians merely hold temporary power, and are downstream from the forces that actually drive their decisions. The cathedral system encourages dark power to stay dark, and it does. Some viewers might be skeptical of this comparison. You might say that comparing the Soviet Union and the United States is absurd because in the Soviet Union the government would jail and murder heretics and limited the freedom of its citizenry generally with a heavy hand. While it is true that the Soviet Union was much harsher than the United States in terms of its use of power, and that it's incontrovertible that any reasonable person would prefer to live in the United States over the Soviet Union at any point in the 20th century, the fact that living conditions in the United States are much better than the Soviet Union is irrelevant when examining systems of control in of themselves. And while it's true that people aren't literally murdered by the government in the United States, at least for crimes of blasphemy, there are certainly extremely harsh consequences wrought on heretics by the cathedral, usually in terms of financial and social destruction. And just like in the Soviet Union, most people will fly under the radar if they have any personal reservations about the system they live in, out of fear of these consequences. In effect, these are very similar conditions. Dissidents do have it easier in the United States, but this is no reason to be complacent and treat the system as anything else than what it is, a deleterious and subversive system of control that seeks greater domination over the human mind. Consider the following clips from Chernobyl. The comments and dialogue fit perfectly in the reactionary frame of reference. Instead of watching passively, consider all of the ideas in terms of what we have learned about the cathedral and truth, and the consequences of this system on our civilization.
What's really interesting is how the ideology of the Soviet Union, the idea of a system that was infallible, and the fear of people to point out any flaws or mistakes, everything had to be perfect, and you had to pretend it was perfect. Any system with too strong an ideology, whether it's the idea of a perfect nation or a perfect belief, leads to exclusion of facts.
When you start to look at all the different causes of this accident to happen, it's the sort of accumulation of that kind of a mentality, which is, it's more convenient to believe comfortable truths and comfortable facts than it is to have to face difficult choices and difficult realities.
But the thing is that the system was guilty.
We're on dangerous ground right now because of our secrets and our lies. They're practically what define us. When the truth offends, we lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid. To be a scientist is to be naive. We are so focused on our search for truth, we fail to consider how few actually want us to find it. But it is always there, whether we see it or not, whether we choose to or not. The truth doesn't care about our needs or wants. It doesn't care about our governments, our ideologies, our religions. It will lie in wait for all time. And this, at last, is the gift of Chernobyl. Where I once would fear the cost of truth, now I only ask, what is the cost of lies?
That should leave you with some food for thought. And remember, this video isn't meant to equate the lived experiences of people under the Iron Curtain with those of Americans, but to show the similarities between the systems of control in both societies, and forewarn against the consequences that inevitably follow the suppression of truth. Remember, as the character of Valery Legasov says,
Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.